Okay, it's been about 45 minutes for me, and this is what my dough is looking like. Alright, remember when I put it in, it was about halfway down the bowl, and now it's risen up to the top. Okay, so we're not going to flour our board. We don't want to add any more flour to this, because remember, it will just dry it out more if you add more flour. So just take some of your cooking spray or oil or butter, just something to keep it from sticking. You're just going to pour that dough right out. Oh, that smells heavenly. And that is a good looking dough. It's nice and soft, it's spongy and springy. Alright, if yours isn't like this, something's not right. You've either added too much flour, your yeast isn't good, your water was too hot. Sometimes people put too hot of water in with their yeast and kill their yeast. Something I like to keep when I'm making bread or any kind of dough that I'm kneading is a bench scraper. And it's around here somewhere. Here it is. I was using it earlier to scrape off all the old little bits from my first kneading. Alright, this is a bench scraper. They come in lots of different sizes and styles. I use it to split my dough, and I'm just going to split this in half. This recipe makes about 2 large loaves. Alright, just set one aside, one section aside, and use your other one. You're just going to pat it out with your fingers. I love working with dough. It just makes me feel happy. Especially when I can tell it's going to be a good loaf. Alright, so I have patted it into a square, kind of a rectangular square. Okay, and you're going to take the side that's away from you and fold it about 1/3 of the way in, and take the other side and fold it about 1/3. So now you have 1/3. Okay, fold it over 1/3 again, and 1/3. Alright, now you can just really work with this dough, and I'm going to roll it into a roll. You don't need to be afraid of working with your dough. You want the air to get out of it from your first rise. Otherwise you'll get big airy pockets in your bread, and that's not good. I've even seen some professional bakers, they'll lift up their dough and just really work it, get the air out. Okay, I've just closed the ends, just shape it. The more bread you make, the more you'll get the feel when you shape of the size that it needs to be. But until that time, you can take your bread pan out. And I have my bread pans sitting here, and I'm just going to spray them some cooking spray, because your bread will stick. If you want, you can lay it next to your bread and kind of get an idea of how long your bread dough should be for your pan. Alright, so I'm going to put that in my prepared pan. You see what it looks like? It's not taking up a whole lot of that, but it's going to rise and fill up a good portion of that. And I also like to spray the top of my bread just a little bit. Put that here. Let's work on the second. You don't need to spray any more, usually. If it starts to stick, give it another little spray on your counter or whatever you're using. Pat that out. Alright. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Turn it and roll it. Now, there's no magical way of making loaves of bread. This is just the way I've been making it for years and years and years. I tuck in those ends. And work it a little bit on the counter. Alright. Okay, spray it on the top. And once again, you're going to let this rise. This rise should take a little less time than your first rise, but it might take about the same amount of time. So just keep an eye on it. Again, put it in a nice warm spot. If it's a sunny day, put your covered bread dough in a warm sunny window. The yeast will love you for that. If not, put it underneath a light, especially if you have a halogen light that will give off a little bit more heat. You can even put it in your oven. But at this point, you should be heating up your oven. At this altitude, I heat my oven to about 370. At sea level, I would go with about a 350 oven and just get that nice and hot and preheated. I'm going to cover these with a little plastic wrap and put them over in my warm spot underneath my stove top. And we'll see you back in about a half an hour. Okay, it's been a little over a half an hour, more like 45 minutes, and my bread has raised, it's filled up the pan as you can see, but it's not billowing over the top of the pan. You don't want to get it billowing over the top of the pan at the rising stage, because when you stick it in the oven, it's going to puff up quite a bit and it might collapse if it over rises. So if you've had experiences in the past with making bread and it's collapsed and be all bubbly on the top, it's over risen, and so just don't raise it so much. What I've done here is I've just taken a pair of kitchen shears and I've snipped down the middle of the bread. Now you don't have to do this, but that bread will rise up and it will crack along the side. That expansion will go somewhere, and I kind of like to make it so it expands down the middle and not along the side. So I'm just going to finish snipping down the middle of this second loaf. You don't put the snips very deep. You can do this with a knife too, but unless you have like a razor blade, it's called a lame, that you can use on your baked good. But I don't have a lame, so I like to use my kitchen shears because my knives tend to pull the dough, and if you pull too hard on it, all that nice air that you've been working into the dough through the rising process is going to deflate your dough a little bit, so you don't want to overwork your dough. So now we're just going to pop this in the oven, and I cook mine for about, at this altitude again, about 35 minutes. At sea level, about 30 minutes should do the trick, but I'll show you how it's supposed to look and sound when it's done, so you'll know that it's done. So we'll get to that point, and I'm just going to stick this in the oven. You want to make sure when you put it in the oven that it's in the middle of the oven, that your oven rack is about in the middle of your oven. So you shouldn't put them in the oven so that they're touching like this. You need to make it so there's nice air circulation possibilities around your bread pans, so they'll get nice and brown on all the different sides. Okay, so I'm just going to stick this in the oven. Another thing, you don't want to slam them down when you put them in. So I'll see you back in about a half an hour. Okay, it's been 35 minutes, and let's see how that bread's doing in the oven. Oh, it looks good. Alright, give it a tap and it should sound nice and hollow, but the key thing to look for is dump it out. Look for a nice golden brown crust all the way around. If it's still a little pale, let it cook a little longer. That also has something to do with the pans you use. I recommend you getting some nice heavy-duty bread pans. The thinner bread pans can cook your bread too much and get the crust too thick. Alright, you hear that? It's beautiful. Alright, don't cut it now. The temptation is great, I know, to cut yourself a slice of nice hot bread from the oven, but if you don't let it sit for about 10-15 minutes to cool off a little bit, you'll squish the bread. It's too hot to cut right yet. So I'd let it sit at least 15 minutes. A half an hour would be an even better amount of time to let it cool off. But if you just can't help yourself, I understand. Nothing better than a warm slice of fresh homemade whole wheat bread with some butter, a little bit of honey on it. Nothing beats it. Alright, hopefully you'll have a great experience with your bread. If you have any issues, remember, just send me an email and I'd be happy to help you. You can walk through it, you can send me pictures of your bread, and I can try to figure out together with you what went wrong. Or if you had a great experience, send me a picture of that as well. Love to have it. Thanks, and see you again next time.